Moon Palace, Chapter 22. Moi leaped to Yuan the moment she opened her door. She wrapped her arms around his torso tightly. Yuan, where have you been? She sobbed, while clinging onto him as they entered the living room. He gently released himself from her grip and sat down on a couch. She immediately sat next to him, leaning her head on his shoulder, and gripped his left arms as if she was afraid he would leave at any moment. Yuan, where have you been? She asked again. I have been so worried. I went to China with my mother, he replied blankly, trying to stay composed. He knew she would be frantic because he did not tell her before the trip. He really did not know how to tell her because he wanted to get away from her the moment she showed him her test. I thought you left me for good, she whimpered. I thought I'd never see you again. Don't be silly, Yuan said. You know I would come back. No, I didn't. I didn't think you will come back, she sobbed again. I thought you don't want me anymore. Of course I want you, he comforted her, while thinking that she should not have contacted the restaurant. But seeing her in such a sad state, he found it difficult to mention it. I'm here now, he touched her wet cheeks. Stop crying, he whispered. Her vulnerability softened his mind. At first, he did not have any idea how to face her, but once he saw the tears on her face and how glad she was to see him, he realized that he missed her. She led him to her bedroom, followed by him closing the door. At the end of Mrs. Lee's hospital bed, Yuan stood in front of his mother, telling her what Moi told him. She can't work at Mrs. Wang's anymore because she is showing, he said quietly. What are you going to do? His mother asked. I have no idea. Mrs. Lee paused for a moment and then said, After you take me back to my house, why don't you bring her over? I want to meet her. Yuan appeared to be stunned, thinking where was this going, and whether it was the beginning of the end for him and Mei Ling and the business. Moon Palace, Chapter 23. They parked the car by a huge lake in a woodland, just in time to watch the sun surfacing through an autumn forest. How did you find this place? Mei Ling asked. A few months ago, I made a delivery up here and found it by accident, Weilan replied and observed. It seemed to be much prettier than last time. He placed his arm over her as she rested her head on his chest. She took a deep breath and said, I've never been to a place like this. She scanned the lake side to side. Why not? He asked. Never had a chance to be this far away from the city. She closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat. He squeezed her and whispered, I'm glad to be able to share this with you. The surface of the water began to show reflections of its surrounding. Occasionally, a fish would jump out, splashing and rippling the surface. Mei Ling could not help being ecstatic when she caught a glimpse of what just happened. A huge smile covered her face, contrary to the face she had a few hours before. Weilong did not ask why she showed up at his door. Perhaps he could tell just by the look of her distorted face in the tight grip she had over her purse, as if she was holding for support. They took a stroll by the lake beneath the rustling trees, and getting the tip of their shoes wetted from the morning dew on the grass. He gently held her hand with his fingers interlaced with hers, sending warmth against cool, crisp air. The sound of birds chirping and a squirrel sprint nearby in an escape mode with a nut in its mouth. He must be gathering for the winter, Wei Long remarked it. The squirrel, as if understood what he just said, paused at the middle of the tree trunk and looked towards their direction. He then rushed towards the top and disappeared in the thick branches. "How many times have you been here?" she asked. "Just a couple of times," he replied. "I generally stay in the warehouse, so I was glad to have the chance to get away." He glanced at her. "Do you like it?" "I love it," she replied, while mesmerized by the leaves in different shapes and rusty shades of colors spread all over the ground. She picked one up that was fiery red and twisted its stem to see the front and the back, and held it for a while before releasing it back where it belonged. An inlet appeared and beckoned them to enter. There were thick bushes along both sides of the trail, some with huge leaves, others small and thorny. Trees hovered like a canopy, with sparks of light twinkling as they swayed with the wind, soft humming throughout from their leaves, with a few calls from a bird or two. At some point, a little bit further away from the side of the trail, were thick ferns carpeted for a long stretch, surrounding several decayed old trees with cavities, along with moss and mushrooms planted on their surface. Both of them were quiet, other than the sound of their footsteps, treading over the trail that gradually ascended and turning steep, with exposed roots from huge trees along the side, unknowingly divided the trail into steps like a stairway. Mei Ling's vision was saturated with a shade of emerald green. Everywhere she looked, she was bewildered how the deep woods stretched as far as the eyes could see, like a huge veil of a peaceful secret, her secret. Suddenly she thought of Yuan and his secret too.